What's good, beautiful people? Welcome back to the Bible series. If you missed the last episode of this series, I suggest that you pause this video right now, and in the description box below is where you'll find that first episode. Reason being is because my videos pretty much piggyback off of one another, so just to make sure that you're not a bit lost and confused and that you fully understand everything that's being said. Now, the rest of us, you already know what's up. Let's dive right in. How's everyone's day going so far, though? I hope that you are not having a good but a great one. If not, I can only just pray that your day takes a brighter turn and that you are always finding at least one thing throughout your day to smile about. Trust me, it really does help for those days. But we are still in the book of Samuel, y'all, and I hope that my last video probably helped move or motivate you guys a little bit to read on. If not, one of my videos these days probably. But anyways, we are now jumping into chapter 15 of this book, and I will be reading off the NIV version just because that's just the version that this Bible is that I have. But of course, you're welcome to read whatever version that you prefer. But at this point, at chapter 15, Samuel is already a prophet of God, and a prophet is just pretty much someone who speaks on behalf of God or declares a message from God. So pretty much, he's like the middleman between God and the people. And God has already anointed someone to be king over Israel, which is now King Saul. So chapter 15 just starts off with God talking to Samuel on delivering a message to King Saul. So verse 2 starts off by saying that this is what the Lord Almighty says: I will punish the Amalekites for what they did to Israel when they waylaid them as they came up from Egypt. Now go attack the Amalekites and totally destroy all that belongs to them. Do not spare them. Put to death men and women, children and infants, cattle and sheep, camels and donkeys. This was the Lord's instructions to give to King Saul, right? And the first question that popped up in my head was, why was God so adamant about killing the Amalekites? Like, what did they do so bad to deserve, God to punish them like this? I mean, the second verse kind of pretty much says that they waylaid them as they came up from Egypt. So basically they stopped or interrupted I guess God's people when they was coming up from Egypt. But I don't know, I just needed like a little bit more background information. So me being me, I decided to do my own little research behind it, and just because I'm nice, I'm gonna share that little information with you guys. But if you go all the way to the second book of the Bible, which is Exodus, is pretty much the backstory behind why God wanted the Amalekites to be defeated. And at chapter 17 verses 8 through 13 is basically where you find the Amalekites decided to attack the Israelites or the people of God at that. They was camped out somewhere near where they stayed at. And of course in in verse 13, you see that God was able to give the Israelites the victory to be able to defeat the Amalekites. However, though, that still did not stop God from, in verse 16, declaring that, and God said, because hands were lifted up against the throne of the Lord will be at war against the Amalekites from generation to generation. And that verse right there just, basically points out, one thing about God is that he does not play about his kids. And this is something that I love to say all the time, because if you read your Bible from time to time, you see throughout verses like where he is always defending, like, the righteous ones or the people that are for him. And if you think about it, it kind of makes sense, because anybody with kids, or if you have a child of your own and somebody did something to your child to hurt them, you're going to want to be 10 toes behind your child. You're going to want to make sure that you step up for them and you defend them, because you have more strength and power since they can't defend themselves. So that's pretty much what God, I guess, was doing at this point. And he didn't like what they did to his people. So he declared that, I'm going to come after these people generations after generations. And as most of us already know, God is a God of his word. Like, he's a man of his word. So the fact that this happened since Exodus, this is when Moses was still leading the people to the promised land, right? So we are now in Samuel, where now Saul is king of the people, and God is still abiding to what he says since Exodus, of making sure that he come after these people generations after generations for trying his people like that. And if you continue on to read through the verses, you see that Samuel finds Saul and pretty much just tells him what God told him to do. And then from there, Saul pretty much gathers up all his soldiers and his men, and they go ambush the Amalekites to defeat them. But from verses 7 through 9, you see Saul kind of pretty much does things his own way. If you read it, you'll see that Saul pretty much, I guess, killed all the people. He kept the king Agag alive. And instead of killing off all the animals that God told him to kill off, he keeps all like the good and healthy looking ones and just only destroys like the bad, weak looking ones instead. So at this point, I'm anxious to continue to read a little bit, because I'm just like, well, he just pretty much disobeyed God. And, in verse 10 through 11, you see, God comes to Samuel about what happens. And verse 11 states that this is now God telling Samuel that I regret that I have made Saul king, because he has turned away from me and has not carried out my instructions. And the reason why this verse stood out to me so much is because, the fact that God is saying that he actually regret is so big to me, because not a lot of times, or well, from reading the Bible so far, I don't see a lot of times where God actually speaks out the word regret. And that's like a heavy word to use, especially like for God being kind and forgiving and loving. The fact that Saul's disobedience was able to drive God to the point of regretting ever even bringing him to where he is at today. Well, not today, but at that time, and making him king, I feel like was so big. And if you go to the book of Deuteronomy, I think I'm saying it right, or probably not, I don't know. But if you go to that book, chapter 28, the first 14 verses of that chapter only talks about the blessings for those individuals who are obedient in Christ. However, though, the last couple of verses, not even couple, the last verses, because there's a total of 68 verses in that chapter, talks about just the curses of those individuals who decides not to obey God. And mind you, the paragraph for the curses are about like this long, y'all, as opposed to the blessings of those individuals who actually obey God is about like this big. And I'm just like, dang, like at that point, that definitely demonstrates like how important and how serious God takes disobedience. When you continue to read on, you see Samuel is now in search of Saul to basically find out what happened, like what's up, why didn't you listen to God's command. And from verses 13 through 15, you see, well, let me read it so you can see what I'm talking about. But verse 13, when Samuel reached Saul, when Samuel reached Saul, the first thing that Saul tells Samuel after he greeted him is, well, I carried out the Lord's instructions. Red flag number 1. Because no, you did not. Carrying out God's instructions is actually doing exactly everything that God told you to do. You only did half. So that's a lie. And then the second verse, so verse 14 reads, but Samuel said, what then is this bleating of sheep in my ears? What is the lowing of cattle that I hear? So pretty much like, I feel like Samuel was saying, you think I'm Boo Boo the Fool? Because like I can actually hear the animals in the background. You know what I'm saying? So obviously you're lying. And then on top of that, whether or not Samuel was able to hear the background of these animals or not, well, the animals in the background or not. At the end of the day, you know, me and God are buddy buddy. You know, I talk to God all the time. So you really think that you was gonna be able to do what you did and he not come and tell me about it? Like, come on now, let's not be dumb. And one thing about it is you can lie and fool your friends or people around you. You can even lie and deceive yourself. But one thing about it is you can't lie and try to deceive God, because at the end of the day, God is omnipresent, which means he is everywhere. You know, there's no hiding from God or keeping anything from God for him not to know what you're doing. You get what I'm trying to say? At the end of the day, that just kind of makes you look goofy on your end, because like God literally sees you. And then verse 15, Saul then answered Samuel back and said, the soldiers brought them from the Amalekites. They spared the best of the sheep and the cattle to sacrifice to the Lord your God, but we totally destroyed the rest. Red flag number 2. First of all, him saying that, I don't know, I feel like he was kind of trying to throw the soldiers under the bus by saying that, oh, they the ones that brought the animals from the Amalekites. First of all, aren't you king? Aren't you their leader? So at the end of the day, whether or not they wanted to bring the animals back, you were the one who God gave the command of what to do exactly. And if you're the one that's on top of them, if you have authority over them, regardless if they wanted to do X, Y, and Z, you had the power and authority to tell them, no, we need to do A, B, and C, because you know what you're supposed to do. God didn't come and tell them what to do. He came and told you, because you're their leader. If you continue to read the verses, Saul just pretty much just keeps sticking behind what he's saying with, oh, like he doesn't think he did anything wrong, that he didn't disobey God, he did listen to him, and he was just only keeping the animals to use for sacrifice. Because at the end of the day, you can't say that you did obey God and you did follow his command because you only did half of what he did. Same thing with when you're completing an assignment. If you only complete half of that assignment, it's still considered incomplete because you didn't finish the rest of the assignment. In verse 22, Samuel finally replies back to Saul again and basically uses his words against him by posing a question. And he says, does the Lord delight in burnt offerings and sacrifices as much as in obeying the Lord? To obey is better than sacrifice, and to heed is better than the fat of rams. So at this point, you know, you basically see a battle between obedience and sacrifice and which one weighs more. And what I decided to do was look up the definitions of obedience and sacrifices so we can really look at it, right? And obedience, according to Oxford, is the compliance of an order, request, or law, or submission to another's authority. But according to my Bible dictionary, it says, you know, obedience is hearkening submissively. So basically listening submissively, right? And sacrifice, according to Oxford, is an act of slaughtering an animal or person or surrendering a possession, as in or to a divine or supernatural figure. And the Bible dictionary for that is slaughtered or slaughtered animal. So once you take these two words and put them on a balance beam, right? Obedience is pretty much just saying like to surrender. So you're surrendering to God, right? And sacrifice is an act of. So you doing like an act of service. So yes, it's good that, you know, you do all these great things for God, as far as like, you know, making sure that, you know, you feed the poor and you help those that are unfortunate with you. Not to say none of that is not good. So same thing with Saul, not to say that sacrificing to God is a bad thing, but at the end of the day, which one you think God, you know, desires more of, or which one you think God actually prefer, you sacrificing to him or you being obedient to what he told you to do? At the end of the day, if God gave you a direct, you know, order and or direct command to do something, and you decide to just do your own thing and use that to justify, oh well, it's not like I did something bad, at the end of the day you still disobeyed God. God is gonna always well, I feel like God is gonna always, pick the individual who is, surrendering to him, who is, in humility before him, because that's what obedience is like, to humble yourself before God, because that's you saying, listen, forget everything that I know or what seems right or wrong. I'm gonna take what you say and actually do it, as opposed to disobeying God, where pretty much you're basically saying that, it's a form of arrogance. You're basically saying that, okay, like, I hear what you're saying, but I think my idea is better, so I'm just gonna go with that one. And what does obedience really mean? Well, based off of my research in the Bible, I pretty much summed up is hearing God's word and acting on it. It also means aligning our will to God's will and just in complete surrender. It is an act of worship and demonstrates our love for him through our actions. And our actions is a statement of where we really stand. It's either you're in agreement with God or you're in rebellion against him, right? So in verse 23, you see Samuel tell Saul that, for rebellion is like the sin of divination, and arrogance like the evil of idolatry. Because you have rejected the word of the Lord, he has rejected you as king. That verse right there pretty much gives you the consequences of Saul's action. And because he decided to disobey God, the consequences of his action is he is now dethroned as king of Israel. He is not in alignment with God's will. And with that being said, what one man won't do or fail to do, another man will, which is why in the next chapter you see Samuel in the search for the next anointed king, and that's where David is pretty much first introduced into Samuel. At the end of the day, there's a lot of instances in the Bible that demonstrates, individuals who actually do obey God and the blessings and favors that follow them afterwards. And then those individuals who disobey God and the consequences that come after that. God telling you to go right, but you decide to go left. Whatever happens after that is not on God, but it's on you, because you decided to go your own way about something he told you to do the opposite. But hopefully this video, you guys were able to, gain whatever lessons from it, or it just gave you food for thought to reflect in your own life. And as always, you guys have a blessed day.